Okay, all. So it's Lucinda Brown here, and I'm the course convener at Nathan, and I'm going to be talking about the Assessment 2 for the Child and Family Health topic or course. So it's a written assessment task. It's due on the 16th of September 2019 at 1700. If you are out on placement, please do not leave it until the last minute, because you will not get an extension because you're out on placement. We will be assessing learning outcomes 2 and 3 in the course profile. Now, it's worth 40% of your overall mark, and it's going to be marked out of 100. So basically, it is a 1,500 word assignment that's designed to develop your ability to gather information from the literature and to apply the theoretical principles and the concepts that you've looked at within the course and your research to the scenario that we're going to be giving you. Now, to answer any questions that you may have around this, we will be doing 2 collaboratives this week. Wednesday the 28th at 10:30am and Wednesday the 28th at 1700, and that will cover if you're on an early or a late shift on placement. Now, the link to the collaborative will be on Blackboard, and we will also email it to you. So let's get into this assignment. So this whole assignment is around the nursing care process, which consists of assessment, diagnosis, planning, implementing, and evaluating. And this assignment is divided into 2 parts, Part 1 and Part 2. Part 1 is based on the nursing process, so we will be talking about that initially, and then we'll discuss Part 2. So Part 1, the assessment. We've done it for you. That's a scenario that you've been given about the Zhang family, which goes for 2 pages and took a very long time to write, trust me. It's very comprehensive, and there's lots of stuff in there that you can draw out on. So, moving on to the diagnosis of the nursing care process or the issue identification. What we're actually asking you to do is to identify a challenge or a problem that is experienced by the family or one of the family members. Now that's, and we're wanting you to identify and describe that problem. So identify and describe. I would strongly encourage you to write with the marking criteria sitting beside you, because when we mark the assignment, this marking criteria is what we are marking to. So you need to make sure that you have met everything in that marking criteria to the best of your ability. So we're also wanting you to make sure that the challenge has been identified by the family or the nurse or both. So who has identified that problem? Now the challenge or the issue, it must be a family health issue, it must be a social or a developmental family challenge. Okay, so it cannot be a medical issue. You will not get marks if you make it a medical issue. Now, it's around about 125 words. General rule of thumb around referencing is really you should be using a reference for every 70 words or so. So 1 reference per 70 words. So it's generally about, so 125 words would be really, we'd be wanting you to include 2 references within that discussion or criteria. Now, the discussion is around how the issue or the problem that you've identified may impact family function. So that is really important. How this challenge will impact family function. So if the issue has been identified by an individual or by the family, it's not about the individual, it's about the family. So how does that issue impact family function? So you've identified the problem, you've identified who came up with that problem, you've made it a family health, a social or a developmental family challenge or issue, and now you're going to discuss how that issue will impact on family function. Looking at part one, still in part one of the assignment, and we're looking at the planning. So you have identified the problem previously. Now, from that problem that you identified or challenge that you identified, we now want you to come up with a nursing goal for the family. Not for the individual, for the family. Now, that goal may be short-term or long-term, and it must be based on the identified issue or problem in the first section of the problem or issue identification part. Now, the goal must be family focused, it must be realistic, and it must be measurable. If it's not measurable, you cannot evaluate it. So please make sure it's measurable. Now, what we're also wanting you to do is discuss the rationale or the reason behind why that goal was chosen. Now, this is something that wasn't done very well in the genogram assignment. People didn't seem to understand what the word rationale meant. If you don't know what rationale means, look it up, because this is what you're going to be receiving the most marks for. Discuss that rationale behind why you chose that goal and why is it a priority for the family for them to achieve that goal. This should take up about 125 words. So again, we're looking at two different references. Okay, so the implementation part of this assignment. So we want you to identify 2 nursing care interventions based on your family achieving the goal that you've previously identified. Now, we want you, so they need to be identified. We then want you to discuss what strategies the nurse will use to enable or support the family to implement each of these interventions. So how is the nurse, or what strategies are they going to use so to get the family to the goal? Now, you need to make sure that you are cognizant or aware of family-centred care and consideration of family dignity and choice throughout this discussion. So it's not you implementing, it's how you will enable or support the family to implement the interventions. And this is 500 words, so it's a big chunk of your assignment. It's worth 20 marks. So it's really important how or what strategies are you going to use to enable the family to implement each of the 2 nursing care interventions that you have identified. Okay, for the evaluation part of this assessment, we want you to discuss how the nurse is going to evaluate the effectiveness. So how effective were these evaluations on family function? Okay, so both nursing interventions need to be discussed. Don't just focus on one, you need to focus on both nursing interventions. Now, this is approximately 250 words. So remember, I said for about 70 words, you want one literature supporting your discussion or rationale or argument or analysis or whatever you're going to do. So for 250 words, you'd be looking at approximately 4 references to support the discussion that you're going to be engaging in on how the nurse will evaluate the effectiveness of both nursing interventions on family function. Easy peasy. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. So still in part 1. Now, in terms of your presentation, do not use table form. Do not. You may use headings, and that will help the markers also. So you could potentially maximise your marks in this time by using headings, because it's not effectively one essay, it's lots of different sections. So you could say part 1A, problem, issue, identification. Part 1B, planning. Part 1C, implementation. Part 1D, evaluation. So it's very clear for the marker what they're looking at and what they're marking. Now, your total suggested word count. Now, it's not set in concrete with the suggested word count for each section. So it's the word count overall is 1,000 words for all sections. So you may look and you may say, well, 500 words is a lot of words for section 3, implementation. I'm only going to do 450 words and add an extra 50 words onto planning. You won't get penalised for that. So it's just 1,000 words in this section. It's up to you how you divvy it up. But generally, look at the marks. And again, this wasn't done well in the previous assignment. People spent ages on and a lot of words on something that was only worth 5 marks. So their discussion on something that was worth 15 marks consisted of 2 sentences, and they didn't get the marks. So make sure you look at the word count suggested and the marks that are given. Okay, let's go on to part 2. So part 2 of the assignment. So this is when Dayu has come to you and she tells you that Lucy's going to kindergarten next year, but she's very worried because the kindergarten has told her that Lucy must be up to date with her vaccinations before she attends. But Dayu has not vaccinated Lucy or Olivia because she was worried about the impact that vaccinations may have on her children. And this is probably fairly understandable given she's had 3 miscarriages. She's a bit stressed about it. So basically what we're wanting you to do is write 500 words on an analysis. So analysis needs to be underlined of evidence-based literature and current policy that is related to this this question. So don't go off evaluating current policy on prisoners in custody because that's not relevant. So you need to analyse evidence-based literature and current policy relating to what we're asking you to do. And what you need to come up from your analysis of that data, you need to come up with a nursing response to Dayu that takes into account that current health policy, and you will reference that in your nursing response. Now, this is worth 12 marks, so it's quite significant. Now, obviously, one of the policies that you're going to be exploring is health policy, but what other policies do you think that you might need to explore? Now, we're not going to spoon feed you on this. This is something that you need to do a literature review on, I guess, a search of the literature and come up what other policies might have an impact on your response to Dayu in terms of her sending her daughter Lucy to kindergarten fully vaccinated. Now, make sure you take into account again patient-centred care and consideration of family dignity and choice. That's worth 3 marks, so it's quite a significant amount of marks. So I hope you're clear on that. And can I just say, in terms of your nursing response, it has to be based on your current health policy. Okay, you can't say, well, I'm an anti-vaxxer and I think it's a load of rubbish, so don't vaccinate. That is not a proper nursing response based on current health policy. So you need to analyse your literature and your current policy and then come up with your nursing response from that. Referencing, easy 10 marks, easy 10 marks. So your references should be no older than 7 years. We're saying a minimum of 10 references. You may use more, but I would say don't go overboard. You know, that was part of the problem again with the previous assignment. People used too many references, and more is not necessarily better. So if you're looking at more than 15 references for a 1,500 word assignment, I'd be going, oh, maybe I'm getting a bit excessive. Certainly I wouldn't be going over 20. That's just totally over the top. You can go up to 20, but I wouldn't go over. You won't get any added marks. Now make sure your sources are scholarly and appropriate. So if we're talking about nursing responses, don't bring in medical, or don't bring in teaching, or don't bring in prison guards. You need to be talking about nursing. It's what we're asking you. So source, nursing sources predominantly. You can, of course, use other sources as well, but are they appropriate? And that's something that you need to ask. Are they appropriate to what I am now doing? Of course, with part 2, you're going to be looking at scholarly sources that aren't necessarily related to nursing, but they're related to immunisation or government policy or whatever. Look at your in-text insertion of your citations. That was poorly done in the previous assignment, and you have to be very careful here. Look at the APA guidelines. Go and do the online referencing workshop if you haven't already done it, because you are easily losing marks with this, many of you, and not using proper in-text insertion and recognition of other people's works at the end of the sentence may actually lead you down the garden path towards academic integrity. So you need to be very clear of this in-text insertion. Please, please, please make sure that you adhere to the APA style guidelines, the 6th edition, please. And again, make sure your references start on a separate page. A lot of references weren't started on a separate page. And I know sometimes when you upload it to Turnitin, it can bugger it up a little bit and put the references on the previous page. But if you end your discussion with a page break, so do insert page break and then start your reference list, then that reference list will always start on a new page. Now, word count, going on to presentation, which is the next one. Formatting guidelines, please make sure you know them. Please make sure the assignments are properly formatted, the correct font size is used. A lot of your markers are old, remember. We find it very hard to read small font. Make sure there's a title page that is not the Griffith University assignment submission cover sheet. That you've got correct spelling, correct grammar, your sentence structure and paragraph structure is sound, and make sure you're using academic language. And I think this is where some of you may fall down in part 2, is that you will fall into a conversation dialogue. Make sure you don't do that. It needs to be academic language. How would you respond to Dayu using academic language? And again, total overall word count is no more than 1,500. We will stop marking after 1,500 words, so you don't get any credit for going overboard. Now, the 1,500 words, just remember, it doesn't include direct quotes. And again, this is something that was poorly done. If you're using a direct quote, make sure it's in quotation marks. Make sure you have the reference after it, including the page number. And we know when you've done a direct quote, or we know when you've taken a chunk out of someone else's work, because we use Turnitin. So make sure if you're using a direct quote, it is recognised and acknowledged. Okay, so Danny, Hazel and I would like to wish you all the best for this assignment. Some of the assignments previously were outstanding and an absolute pleasure to read. And we love that. We love reading good assignments, and we learned something from it too. So we are looking forward to marking your assignments. I hope your placements are going very, very well, and we look forward to speaking to you in the collaboration.